If it seems like a national pastime, even an integral part of the Canadian identity, to hate Toronto, it certainly hasn't gone unnoticed by Torontonians. But as people continue to vote with their feet, keeping it Canada's largest city, some feel it's high time the city's power grew along with it. Joining us now to consider the question of Toronto versus everybody. In Calgary, Alberta, Martha Hall-Findlay, former Liberal MP, now President and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. And here in our studio, former Progressive Conservative Finance Minister Janet Ecker, now President and CEO of the Toronto Financial Services Alliance, Sevon Pelvetzian, CEO of Civic Action, and John Moore, host of Moore in the Morning on News Talk 1010, what some of us back in the day used to call CFRB. Anyway, great to have everybody here in our studio. Martha Hall-Findlay, lovely to have you on the line from Calgary, Alberta. We want to start with, of course, the thing that has been so hot in the news as of late, Premier Kathleen Wynne disallowing the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, and City Council's plan to toll the two major expressways that the City of Toronto controls, the Gardiner Expressway, the Don Valley Parkway. Instead, the Premier has promised to double the city's share of the gas tax, and she will transfer that to the city to, in her words, make up for the lost revenue for the lack of tolling. Janet Ecker, to you first. What do you think of this development?
Well, it was unfortunate that the way the mayor sort of sold it to his council and to the public was that this would sort of make 905 pay. And you know, I mean, the majority of people who use those two roads are Torontonians. And the 905 would argue that those people are coming into town to take, you know, do jobs and, you know, that they are already contributing in a number of ways. But I mean, I understand the politics of why the mayor felt he had to do that. It certainly worked for the council. But I can remember sort of going, oops, because I just knew what the reaction would be. And sure enough, 905 said nuts to you and put pressure on the MPPs and the cabinet. And the premier was stuck where she had to make a choice.
And you, having represented a 905 riding,
it can be quite different.
You knew what was coming.
It can be quite different.
Okay, Martha Hall-Findlay, you used to represent a North Toronto riding. What's your take on this?
I actually thought it was a very courageous move on John Tory's part. Deciding to put tolls on roads is not an easy thing to do politically, obviously, as the Premier found. But, you know, the challenge is that cities don't have the ability to tax on income. Only the provinces and the federal government do. And as more and more people move into the cities, more and more services are needed. The cities need to do many more things for many more people. That imbalance in terms of taxation capacity really is difficult. You have to get the money from somewhere. I really thought it was a courageous move on John Tory's part and somewhat unfortunate that the two of them didn't figure that out beforehand.
Sevon, what's Civic Action's view on the imposition of the tolls and then the Premier's cancelling of them?
I personally was shocked. You know, I was excited that for what seemed like the first time in a long time, planets had aligned. You know, on the federal level, we have a prime minister with cities on the urban agenda. You know, this great backdrop that city building is nation building, check. At the provincial level, we have a premier who has served as transportation minister, who is of an urban riding, whose 2/3 of the cabinet is from the GTA in Toronto, check. And then finally on the municipal level, we have a mayor who's bold enough to say, with the target on, let's do this. We have to do this. So I was very excited that those planets had aligned. I was surprised when the meteor struck, and
surprised? Is that as far as you want to go?
That's as far as I'm going to go. And I was so surprised that the meteor struck and the U-turn happened, because I think it pushes us back, and it worries me about what the state of the urban affairs for this country will be going forward.
John, your view.
Yeah, well, as political double crosses go, I don't know if it gets bigger than this one, because if you follow the inside information of what was happening, I mean, John Tory's a careful guy. He knew he was sacrificing a lot of political capital. He went to Kathleen Wynne and she said, I've got your back. And then her caucus started to rebel to the point where, you know, some people were saying, I'm not going to run for you, Kathleen Wynne. So she had to double cross him. And I'm terribly disappointed. I mean, I am a self-identified downtown bicycle riding elitist anyway, but user pay.
You're a downtown what?
Bicycle riding, worst meter drinking elitist.
Lots of
It's not at all surprising that a guy like me is pro tolls. I'm about user pay, and I don't care where you come from. If you're using it, pay for it. So I was astounded. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was actually on the road. I was in Iceland, and I woke up and I saw the news, and about 10 minutes later, an email from John Tory came through. And, you know, he doesn't use the words double cross, but I think that is certainly the impression.
It was your government, I shouldn't say your government, you were a part of the government that actually gave those two highways, which were under the provincial responsibility to the City of Toronto to maintain, et cetera, right? It was the Mike Harris government that did that. If that's the case, shouldn't the city be able to do whatever they want to do in order to maintain these roads?
Well, yeah, and one of the things that our government tried to do, was to sort of make the delivery and the payment of government services more rational, which it never tried to do that. It never works. Government is not rational. Because what we were trying to do was that the level of government that delivered a service should be the level of government that pays for the service, so you've got good accountability. And so, a lot of things happened in terms of changing services, giving different revenue sources to different municipalities, et cetera. But the problem is that I think, and the challenge we're seeing in Toronto, you can argue about they should spend money better this way or that way. You can make a good argument that their property taxes are lower than the 905 property taxes and that they should adjust those. But at the end of the day, it is very difficult for municipalities in the current sources of funding that they have to do major infrastructure projects. And I think looking at 3 levels of government partnering in the right way on major infrastructure is how we need to continue to move forward. The other challenge that you've got, and I agree with user pay, absolutely, but one of the principles, and you saw the Premier now talk about it, was that you shouldn't toll something where there isn't an alternative, which is a little tough when you got the Don Valley and the Gardner.
It's a little tough, meaning that's an
there
argument
isn't that alternative. I mean, it is a little tough. But yes, I agree that I thought the Mayor was very courageous on this, and I think there needs to be a very serious conversation between the province and the city about, look, we've got to move forward and we've got to get some of these issues done.
Martha, let's figure this out, because there is a tendency, I suspect, outside the Greater Toronto Area to say it's all just Toronto and it's all their mess. Of course, if you live in the 416, you may feel a little differently about things than if you live in the 905. Do you think this emphasizes the differences, the way this whole story has worked itself out, between those who live in the actual city of Toronto and those who live in the belt of ridings around the city of Toronto?
It's interesting. I mean, I spent many years living in downtown Toronto. I spent many years living out in rural Ontario as well. And it's always fun to bash Toronto, and especially now I'm in Calgary, it's fun to bash Toronto. But it really does beg the question of where does the money come from to support the incredibly important economic activity that Toronto represents. I mean, it can't be lost on anybody that Toronto is hugely important economically. I mean, the people who live in the belt, the 905ers who come into Toronto, they have jobs in Toronto because Toronto has such a robust economic activity. And I guess the question then, where do people think that the money is going to come from? I mean, if Premier Wynne says, well, sorry, Mr. Mayor, we're not going to let you actually charge people for the use of Toronto roads, but we'll give you some money instead, that money comes from Ontarians as well. So in a way, there are an awful lot of people outside of Toronto who are going to be paying for the decision not to let Toronto actually charge for using what's part of Toronto.
Sevan, a follow-up?
Well, I think this is a great point, because it's not only the philosophical question on where is the money going to come from, but the city of Toronto is at a breaking point with its finances. I mean, we have our chief financial officer that's being considered more a magician than a senior executive, having to pull these rabbits out of hats to figure out how to balance the books every year, because by law, we have to, right? The city has to. So we have stripped our savings account, the reserve, down to nothing. We've maxed out 3 of our credit cards. 42% of all of the net new revenue that's coming in is coming out of the land transfer tax. That's artificially buoying our city's economy and what we can afford. And so I think this is not just a statement around the rights and the powers of urban issues, but very much a statement on the financial viability of the golden egg of Ontario.
But the other thing that we've got to remember, too, is that Toronto also has to make very difficult decisions about what they're going to pay for and what they aren't going to pay for. I made the point about the infrastructure projects. I agree with that. But at the same time, and when you were in the provincial government, you were always incredibly frustrated with the city of Toronto at some of the spending decisions that they continued to make. You can't do everything. You can't be everything to everybody. And so that is one of the challenges that the city has to confront. I mean, the mayor is trying very hard to do that. But he has one vote on a council that that can be quite fractious from time
One
to
of
time.
45.
That's right, and that was a mistake. We should have, when we merged the city, did the amalgamation, we should have cut it down to 22. You would have had a fighting chance. But that is one of the challenges. Toronto has to wrap their head around that, because Siobhan is absolutely right. I mean, it's amazing every year that they manage to find a rabbit in the hat, and one of these years they're not going to.
Let me put the okay, John, you come
One thing
back.
worth noting, though, if I can pipe up, because some people are probably shouting at the television, people who know the mill rate know that Toronto actually has very low property taxes.
That's exactly where I was going to go.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
people from
Yeah, what I
outside
said
of Toronto
earlier.
are going to say,
Yeah.
pay your own bills for Pete's
right,
sake,
yeah.
and why are you afraid to do so? The city has so much wealth, and yet somehow we don't manage to bring in enough to pay for the city we want to build.
Yeah.
Let me follow up on that, because the reality is, because the city of Toronto is so much older than all of its surrounding suburbs, the inner suburbs and beyond, the property taxes are disproportionately lower for those who live in the 416 than those who live in the 905. And the argument that the 905ers have been making is, look, you want more money? Don't toll me. Raise your own damn property taxes. Why is that not a good argument?
I think it's a great argument.
So you're there.
But,
I
you
do
know,
too.
you
Now,
are too.
I don't own a house in Toronto, but I think it's a very good argument.
Well, I'll be accused of being, a snob and a person of privilege, I guess. And well, you can afford your taxes. I can't afford my taxes. So
Yeah, but the other thing too is the City of Toronto, like all municipalities, have great levers in terms of how they adjust their property tax. So you can phase in, you can try to make sure that certain neighborhoods, there's a lot of choices that they can make, but at the end of the day, they have to start raising them to pay for some of these services too. That's another challenge they've got to meet.
Martha, go ahead.
Does it make sense still to rely on something like property tax? I mean, the whole concept of that is a little bit archaic. It's like you used to only be able to vote if you owned property. Now you have to own property to pay property tax, but it's only those who own property who pay property tax. So this has been an ongoing challenge for municipalities for years, that you have all sorts of people who don't own property, who use all sorts of services that the municipalities are asked increasingly to provide. I think that's the bigger challenge, than just simply to say, you don't charge as much for your property tax as you should. I think the bigger question is, we need to look much more seriously at the whole structure of how municipalities the size of Toronto, which is bigger than how many provinces now in terms of people
Well,
and
if it
economic
were a
activity?
province, it would be number 5, I think.
It would be number 5. So, I think the question is a much larger one. It's not enough to say we just need to raise property taxes. We need to really look at how municipalities are able to raise money.
You know what? Since she's gone there, can I bring this
I
up?
was just going to say, there is no one solution. I mean, it has to be property tax. It has to be making cost sharing on infrastructure projects. It has to be making on new revenue sources. There's a whole range of things that have to be brought in, and there's not just one solution.
Sheldon, let's do this now. We were going to get to this later, but Martha Hall just brought it up. So here we go. Where Canadians live. The province of Ontario, obviously the most populous province in the country with 13+ million people. That's, of course, including the capital city. Let's keep going. Quebec at more than 8 million is number 2. BC with more than 4.5 million is number 3. Alberta with just 4 million is number 4. And if it were a province, Toronto would be the 5th largest province in Canada with 2.7 million people. How about let's keep going. What we spend on government expenditures. Manitoba's at 16 billion plus, Saskatchewan at 14 billion. There's Toronto. Toronto spends more than Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and we can keep on going down the list. So apropos of Martha Hall's question, Sevan, let me pick this up with you. John Tory said it the other day when he got surprised, which was the word you used, when he got surprised, and he even said, the days of having to walk cap in hand in short pants to Queen's Park ought to be over.
Yes.
It's humiliating and it's no way to do business. So what are the alternatives?
I completely agree with that statement. I mean, it's 2017 and we are running a country that's largely urban. I mean, 86% of Ontarians live in urban settings, but we're running it in an 1867 constituted framework kind of environment. We still need to go to the province as cities for major issues like road tolls. But if the mayor chooses to meet in camera with his executive council, province may I. If the TTC wants to put cameras on the side of its streetcars to catch drivers that don't stop, province may I.
They need permission from the province for all this.
Permission for all this. Steve, we could keep going. I mean, it just came off the Transformational Task Force on Policing. If you want to take police officers off traffic duty and put traffic wardens there instead, province may I. So I worry that not only is there a gross disparity between what the proper accountabilities that cities really should be able to do on their own, but it's taking time out of important legislative time that the province should be focusing on.
So Martha, let me ask you about that. Why in 2017, when almost everybody seems to recognize that the City of Toronto is a mature political unit, why does the province still insist on being so much in its business?
Well, part of it is that that's how the Constitution was drafted, right? And to Siobhan's point, we are living in an era of 2017, but our structure was actually created quite 150 years ago, when our population diversity was completely different, far, far more rural. And to anticipate that somehow the cities would actually be bigger, more important, larger economic centers than the provinces wasn't thought of at the time. But who wants to go and revisit the Constitution, right? That's not exactly a politically attractive thing to do. So really, if you wanted to say we want to give municipalities the ability to tax income, for example, and to Janet's point, it's no one solution, but there's a part, for me, it bothers me that only people who own property pay for things. I'm a big believer in
user fees
those
too,
who use
Martha.
services
I mean, there's a
actually
lot of
also
user
pay
fees.
too.
Yeah.
But it would be it just, I think, politically very difficult to say, let's revisit something that is so fundamental to the Canadian constitutional structure.
Well, Janet, let me follow up with you on that, because Dalton McGuinty's government, we're going back from before Kathleen Wynne became Premier, did acknowledge that the City of Toronto was becoming a more mature political unit and therefore ought to have more powers to do its own thing. And they passed a quote-unquote City of Toronto Act, giving the city the right to do more things than it could in the past. Why don't they update that act? Why don't they just let Toronto do more things?
I think they should. I think they should. But the challenge, too, and if you talk to provincial officials who've been involved in this debate over many, many years, is that every time you want to have that conversation, the city's historical practice has been whine, they want more.
Historical or hysterical?
Both, actually, both. So unfortunately, there's a history that has caused, I think, many in the provincial government to be a little leery of, let's just hand the keys to the City of Toronto. But I think I think the government needs to try again. As I said, our government tried with the good old infamous who does what thing to try and have that kind of conversation. I think they should try it again. I suspect, though, that this is not the year to do it when you've got, a provincial government and the mayor, elections on the horizon. But perhaps the first thing they should do, whoever ends up, in the government at any level, is try to do it again when you've got a bit of a 4-year runway to try and sort out, because it's messy. Trust me, it's very, very messy. But it's a very necessary conversation, because the other thing, and Martha made this point, this city is the economic driver of this province and this country. And if we don't get it right, we are all in big, big trouble.
Oh man, you realize by just articulating out loud what you just said, that everybody who lives outside the city
will hate me.
Absolutely.
Yes,
We're good with that.
and I say that like, I live in Ajax. I live in 905. Yeah. I ran in 905. Trust me, I understand that tension and that dynamic. But the facts, not alternative facts, the facts are the facts. Toronto is driving the economy of this country, and we need to get it right. Yeah.
Does the capital city of Ontario need more powers to do its thing?
It does, but we're setting aside the fact we had a deal, we had a solution. We had something that was going to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars. It was nixed for political reasons. So it's not entirely a power issue or a constitutional issue.
Darn those politics.
I mean, I'll take it even further. I am a believer in the city-state. Now, I'm not one of those people who thinks we should be a province, but I do believe that cities around the world are becoming more important than countries. And when you travel and somebody says, where are you from? Do you say you're from Toronto or from Canada? Quite often, I would assert most people say they're from a certain city, and that's why those cities need power to run themselves and to be autonomous.
Well, actually, if the mayor should be careful, because if I were the premier and the mayor were to say, I want to be a city-state or a city province, I'd say, cool, you can pay for health care. But
I'm not sure that's what he had in mind.
No, I know. Yeah. I don't think so. Be careful what you wish for.
They already offloaded a lot, though.
Well, they also downloaded a lot of revenue, too. Let's be clear on that one.
And uploaded education.
Yeah, part of the, yeah. But what is interesting on this economic piece is because something really cool has happened in this town in the last couple of weeks. All of the regions, with support from the province and the support from the feds, have built a new regional economic development agency called Toronto Global, the brand Toronto Global.
And the province funded it.
And the province and the feds and five of the regions, city, everybody's in. And it's kind of exciting because it's never happened before. Many folks have tried to make this happen. It never worked, but talking about the stars are aligning.
What's the significance of it?
Well, because all of the municipalities, the province and the feds are recognizing that Toronto is a region that is an economic driver, and it's also recognizing that while we have great strengths in this region, we are not punching at our weight in terms of the attraction of foreign direct investment. We rank up in the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of a whole bunch of quality of life business destinations, but we're down like 17th or 20th when it comes to attracting new investment into the region. And again, if we're going to keep that economic engine going here for the rest of the country, we need to make sure that we are attracting and building the kind of jobs of the future that we need. And this agency is going to be really driving that.
Let me follow up with you on that. We have heard now the cry from many of you that Toronto needs more levers to do its thing, that property taxes aren't going to realize enough revenue to pay for all the things that the people in this city say they want. So like what? Throw some ideas on the table.
Well, let's go back to the City of Toronto Act from 2006. It was designed by some brilliant bureaucrats who worked really hard on it to give the City of Toronto broad authority to manage its fiscal affairs. But there's a whole bunch of footnotes at the bottom. That's like saying, let's agree curfew's 11. And then you go to head out at 11 and they say, did I say 11? I meant 9:30. If you're going to create broad authorities to manage your fiscal affairs, you need to live by it.
Oh, and we should explain, that's why the Premier had to green light at the end of the day, the tolls.
There's a lot of stuff that the Ontario government still needs to green light. So I think this is not just about putting, the external puzzle pieces of what the rules are, but then letting cities hold the pen in writing their own destiny. It's, on paper.
Accountability.
And the accountability that goes with it. The
That's
accountability that goes with it. I come, like you, from a family of 5 kids, and the eldest. We were all equally loved, but we did not all have the same rules and responsibilities at the same time. Toronto is a unique beast. It does power 20% of this country. It does power half of this province. It has earned the right to be able to manage its fiscal books, and in fact, it has a legal responsibility to do that. Let's let the powers from 06 actually get a chance to be flexed before we add even more in.
I need, on behalf of my mother, to make a gentle correction here, because I'm pretty sure she didn't have 5 kids. I think she only had 2, my brother and me. But we'll talk about afterwards what you meant.
Like more. You feel like more.
No
Have
kidding.
you met your
No
brother?
But
kidding.
it's a good story.
She tells me she wanted to have 4, then she had me and she said, okay, 3. Then my brother came along, she said, I'm done. Anyway, but that's another show for another time. Do you want to do this clip now, Mark? Let's do this. Do I need to set this up at all? Hang on, where is this here? This is a little comedic, Let's All Hate Toronto comedic entertainment here. This is from a 2007 documentary called Let's All Hate Toronto. Roll it, please.
Often called the center of the universe, Toronto is Canada's economic engine. The city is home to Canada's financial industry, its banks, and the media. And that media, in turn, has made Toronto Canada's most famous city.
I hate the Sky Dome and the CN Tower too. I hate Nathan Phillips Square and the Ontario Zoo. The rent's too high, the air's unclean, the beaches are dirty and the people are mean, and the women are big and the men are dumb, and the children are loopy because they live in a slum. The water is polluted and the mayor's a dork. They dress real bad and they think they're New York. In Toronto, Ontario.
That's not bad, actually. That's not bad. Okay, Martha, you live outside.
Need some fact correction. Need some fact correction
Yeah,
there.
David Miller's not going to like being called a dork, especially
No.
considering who
He's heard
succeeded him.
worse.
But anyway, he has heard worse. Martha, you live in Calgary right now. How true is what you just heard as far as what Calgarians think of this place?
Well, an awful lot of us who live in Calgary actually are from Toronto and various other places. But it's way more fun to make fun than it is, I think, a real thing. but I'm still smiling because that's a pretty funny clip. I think it's fun and it's easy to bash Toronto, but listen, Calgary and Edmonton, Calgarians bash Edmonton and Edmontonians bash Calgary at least as much as either one of them bashes Toronto. So I think it's more fun than anything.
But Martha,
else, really.
if we were to put to Calgarians what Janet Ecker just said, namely that Toronto is the straw that stirs the drink, how would that go over in Western Canada?
Well, now that Calgary is the 4th largest city in the country, having spent time in Ottawa, love Ottawa, but it's now number 5. Calgary has moved ahead. Calgary is a great place, no question. But I think a lot of people would say maybe just recognize that Toronto is not the only economic engine in the country. There's no, Vancouver, there's all sorts of stuff happening in Vancouver. Calgary, obviously, but a lot of the cities in the country are incredibly important, not only for their regions, but for the country as a whole, because there are differences in terms of regions, there are different types of economic activity, and so I have to admit, Janet, when you said that, I kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit. I'm not sure if it was caught on camera, but. In that sense, yeah, I think we need to be a little more aware of what the whole country does.
Yeah, but it's not a black and white statement. To sit there and say that Toronto is the economic driver of the country doesn't mean that Calgary or Montreal or Vancouver are not also incredibly important to the economy of the country as well. I mean, Canada, even though the financial industry is headquartered in Toronto region, Montreal is starting to become known, for financial services. Calgary and Vancouver. I mean, we have 4 cities with strengths in financial services. But saying that the financial and business capital of the country is here doesn't negate that. And that, I think, is the challenge at the political level, is to try and make decisions that don't get caught up in the politics of one region getting something over the other region.
John, let me get you in on this because, of course, as part of your duties as a morning radio guy in this city, you talk to people.
Yeah.
And you talk to people from the 416 and the 905. Is it your sense that that the 905 has a huge hate-on for those who live in the 416?
Well, I mean, you have to set the table first that I'm from Montreal. So Montreal, we grew up with this hate-on for Toronto to the point where I moved here in 2003. When I go home, it's like I'm on a break from a hostage taking. People clutch my hand and ask me if everything's all right. Do I want to give them a coded signal that I need out? But no, I think one of the problems with this divide of the 905 and Toronto is that Toronto can, and Toronto versus the rest of the country, Toronto can be a little precious at times.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And we can be a little smug, and the whole idea that we're a special kind of New York in Canada, I think, is kind of up the nose of a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But also there is an impression, and I think largely created by things like the Rob Ford Revolution and stuff like that, that we're looking down on anybody who doesn't want to live in Toronto. And I don't do that, but I'll get that quite often. People call in and say, why do you look down on people who spend 2 hours in traffic? I say, I don't. You're my living. I love congestion. I love you in traffic listening to me. It's not a judgment. It's just not my chosen life. Everywhere I've ever lived, every city I've lived in the downtown, that's what I love. But there is an impression that there's a judgment and a snootiness about it, and I think that's where the tension comes from. Mm-hmm.
They used to say, Sevan, that what's good for General Motors is good for Canada, is good for America, whatever. Can you say that whatever's good for Toronto is good for Canada?
I guess it depends on the variable. I think the point around GDP contribution is just fact. We do produce 20%, so if you took that out, would the rest of Canada feel it? Yes. I mean, Toronto's economy is the equivalent of Saskatchewan and Manitoba and PEI all rolled up. So absolutely, there's going to be that connection there. But it also does not, I think by being able to celebrate that fact does not mean that we have to depreciate the unique attributes of every other part of this country, whether it's Calgary, whether it's Montreal, whether it's the East Coast. I mean, our country is special for many reasons, but our country thrives for a handful in particular. And that credit does still need to happen here at the center, not of the universe, but geographically of our country here in the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area.
Well, one of the things that is unique about Canada, we talk about, collaborative and all of those things that we like to think we are as Canadians, and most of the time we are. We have equalization payments. in this country. And one of the things that I think was wonderfully Canadian is that, you know, richer provinces pay into the formula to help support provinces that don't have as much. And it now you can argue with, but it needs to be fixed and all of that. And again, it's like the Constitution. Everybody can spend years dumping on it.
As a principle, you're
okay
with it.
As a principle, I think it is fair because we are a country. We want to have standards in terms of health care and other issues across the country. So at least in goal and in intent, I think it's a really good thing for sharing and making sure that all of that economic wealth that might be generated by an Ontario, by an Alberta, you know, or even Newfoundland, everybody's we've seen it in our lifetime where the economic growth can vary from region to region, but the country as a whole can take advantage
So
of that.
follow up on this, because you've been Minister of Finance, so I want to ask you this question. Sevan just used the word thrive. How do we get Toronto to thrive? Okay, right now there's a whole slew of things that Toronto can't do unless they go cap in hand in short pants to Queen's Park and ask permission. Let's say
visual image.
I know, it's not good.
Sorry,
It's not good. Let's
Sorry.
say you wanted to change that.
Yeah.
Let's say the province, in its magnanimity, decided, okay, we're going to let Toronto run more of its own affairs. What levers should be included on that list?
Well, I think, again, it gets back to the accountability. Like if you're going to be accountable for a particular service, then you are accountable for paying for it.
Should Toronto have its own sales tax?
I don't think so, because the problem that you get there is that then you're going to drive economic distortion by that, right? I mean, if we have to pay a tax on something in downtown Toronto to buy a product, we're going to buy it in Ajax where we don't have to pay the tax.
Should they bring
right?
back the vehicle registration tax, which the Ford administration killed?
60 million.
Yeah, 60 million. I mean, and again, I don't have to run municipally, but I think sources of user pay fees, I think, yes, they should be looking at that and bringing those back. One big piece. Yes, they should be looking at where they should say, okay, this we do, this we won't do. That's a major discussion that Toronto needs to continue to have. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be done in that area.
John, as a latte... Sorry, go ahead, Martha.
No, tolling,
They
yeah.
could actually
they can
let
actually toll
Toronto
roads.
Yeah.
Toll
put
roads.
tolls on the roads.
Yeah.
The problem was all the 905 and 416 members of the Liberal caucus at Queen's Park would have a mutiny if that were to happen, and that's why it got thumbs down.
But at some point, if you want to talk about what should the province do to allow a city like Toronto to raise more of its funds and be accountable, then it seems to me that the tolls were, as I said right at the beginning, courageous. I mean, it took a lot of courage for John Tory to do that. But that's something that has been talked about for municipalities all over the world, right? So let's let Toronto do that.
John is a latte-sipping, downtown-living, white wine-drinking urbanite.
Forgot the bicycle, didn't we?
Bicycle-riding
that's right.
urbanite who wouldn't have to pay a vehicle registration tax.
Oh, I would. I have a car.
Oh, you do?
Sure.
Oh,
People
well,
forget cyclists or motorists. But
welcome
anyway.
to the 20th century. That's so great. What's on your list of things that you'd like to see changed?
I'm a best practices guy. I want stuff that works. I think that the tolls was a great solution, and it was actually fair. But we've already seen politically you can't sell it. I'm not unconvinced actually that sales tax is I think it may be a good idea. See, what I hate is when we get into all these artisanal little things, and we just find we're going to tax you according to the number of axles you have or the number of doors into the house, whatever. Let's just come up with a fair and equitable way of doing it. And I agree entirely with Janet. This city can never agree what services we could shed. We had this core services review where we came up with a whole list of things we should get rid of, and every time you got to one of them, they said, "Oh, I like that one. I rely on that one." So
Well,
you can't cancel that.
we've turned outsourcing garbage collection into an existential crisis.
Yes.
Well, we didn't do it. Somebody did
Yeah,
it.
that's right. Okay.
Somebody did it. We're down to about a minute and a half here. Okay, Sevan, what you want to go? What's on your list? I mean, is a vehicle registration tax on your list?
I liked when it was on that list. I mean, so there's two things for me. There's the size. How much does it pull in? Because there's a whole bunch of, I'll call them boutique, right? Things that are, distracting and people don't like to see, and it really doesn't actually contribute that much to the bottom line.
So forget them.
So I have less time for those. But so I'm interested in size, and I'm interested in the sustainability, the
Land
long-term.
transfer tax, then?
Land transfer tax is
For home sales?
obviously is saving our life as a city right now, and that's what's concerning.
Because it's bringing in so much money.
It's bringing in, it's really the only thing that's bringing in money of that order of magnitude. I mean, we saw executive committee agree to a hotel tax, but even that's going to bring in about $5.5 million a year. We're going to see vacant properties, businesses that are going to have to pay for that. So those are going to help. It's like saving at home. Every every little bit helps, but ultimately there are a few big ticket items, and it's property tax, it's road tolls, and these are the things that are the political lightning rods.
And let's stop digging the hole. I mean, love the mayor.
What's they say?
Yeah,
First thing you discover?
stop digging.
Stop digging.
And I mean, love the mayor dearly, but when he decided, and again, I never saw a political constituency for let's let every kid under 12 free on the TTC. And I mean, and executing that is a bit of a mess. But like, there was no great groundswell of saying, let's give that freebie out. And they did. The city did, and so let's stop that too. That has to be part of the equation. Again, making choices about what we're going to spend our money on and what we aren't.
I'm still waiting for the Ecker plan when she fires half the members of Toronto City Council and reduces the size.
As I
Size
said,
matters.
I'm not running for office.
No, you're not.
So I can
Clearly.
say these. I'm saying these things.
Clearly not. Martha Hall Finley, awfully good of you to join us on the line from your
Great to be here.
newly transplanted home of Calgary, Alberta. We miss you here in the city of Toronto. And Janet
great to
Ecker
be with you.
from the Toronto Financial Services Alliance, Sevon Pelvetzian from Civic Action, and John Moore, who you can listen to on News Talk 1010 every morning from, gosh, you get up early, don't you?
5:30 to 9.
5:30 a.m. till 9. Good of all of you to join us around our literal and metaphorical table here this evening on TVO. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.